Hi there, and welcome to the studio, and welcome to the Creative Endeavor podcast. This is the podcast bringing you inspiring stories from creative professionals from around the world. It's real conversations with real artists. Now, here with the new series of podcasts that I have to share with you, I've decided to actually put them up here on my main channel as a podcast. I used to share the exclusive video version with my Academy students, and there'll be a special way that they can take part in future episodes. But I really wanted to share this video version here with you and share in some of the inspiration that I get whenever I talk to another artist. Now, I've been making art professionally for 20 years, and in that time, you kind of tend to get into a habitual kind of groove. You get set in your ways. And I like to think that I'm open to all sorts of new approaches, but there's nothing quite like rubbing shoulders with others, talking shop, and working out what makes others tick creatively, particularly some of those people that really inspire you. And so that is the purpose of this podcast, is to reach out to other artists, other professionals working today, and find out just how they do it. And so my hope here with this podcast is to share with you some tips and strategies and things that maybe might not be on your radar, but something that will give you just a little bit of an edge. You see, if you want to step out and become a professional artist, and maybe even just kick your creative journey along a little bit, or just have something inspiring to listen to while you're working in the studio, then that's really what I hope to bring you here with this podcast. Now, of course, if you want to listen on the go, there are audio versions to the podcast as well. You're going to find links to those in the description down below. But in this episode, I've got a special guest joining me. I'm talking with Kenneth Yarus, who's an amazingly talented young artist out of Montana. Now, Kenneth produces some knockout, killer, beautiful landscape paintings. And it was really fantastic to hear how where he started, he ended up doing this kind of work, because it wasn't necessarily a straight path. There were a few hurdles that he had to go through and a few subjects that he had to explore before he landed on what he really wanted to do, what he was really passionate about. And through this conversation, I got to hear a little bit about Kenneth's mindset and just what it's taken for him to be able to develop the mental fortitude to be able to sustain long hours in the studio, build great habits, and some of his strategies for success. Now, Kenneth is represented by about half a dozen reputable galleries in the United States. How do you do that? I get a lot of questions quite often about how to get represented by galleries. And that's one of the purposes of this podcast, is to give you some of those strategies and tips. And so Kenneth really shared quite a bit there in regards to the gallery question. Now, before you get into this episode, make sure you're following Kenneth right now on Instagram. He can be found at Kenneth Yarus, as well as his website at www.kennethyarus.com. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavor podcast, and that there's a takeaway or two for you here, something that you can apply to your own creative journey. And if there's a little nugget here that you can latch onto, I'd love to hear what that was for you. I've got a few that it really got me thinking, but I'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and hit me up in those comments down below. And of course, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to see more podcasts just like this, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Now, without further ado, here's Kenneth Yarus and the Creative Endeavor. Kenneth, brother, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good to see you, man. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about this back and forth for, gosh, maybe the better part of a year. When I was doing the Creative Endeavor last, I really wanted to connect with you, and then I ended up putting the Creative Endeavor podcast on a shelf for a little while. But it's so good to kick off Creative Endeavor third season, 3.0, let's call it, here with you. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, man, it's a huge honor. Like I said, I've been just eagerly waiting this. It's a big point of excitement for me, and thank you for having me.
Oh, look, man. No, I'm so excited to get into whatever we have to talk about. So, if you're cool, let's just jump straight into it.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So, look, obviously, we've been following each other for years. I think I might have been following you first. Okay, I found you online on Instagram, and I was looking at these paintings, just going, this is unbelievable, the quality of work. It's just incredibly well executed, beautiful landscapes. People would have heard from the introduction a bit about what you do. So I hope by now they've been able to go and just follow you on Instagram, check out your website. But obviously, these paintings and how well executed they are, this is the result of countless hours of toil in the studio, experimentation, dedication. What I'd really love to know is where did this start and when did this start for you? Because you're a young guy. You obviously started last week. So how did this all happen for you? Take us back to the beginning.
Yeah, sure. No, it's you're not wrong about it. The endless hours of toil. I mean, that's and I think the listeners of your podcast will know that there's no I wouldn't necessarily say there's no such thing as talent, but there's absolutely a an assumption that this comes easy to people, and it just doesn't. There's I mean, I think what I would try to think of outside of talent would be aptitude, and that would be something maybe that I had really, really young as a kid, just being known as the art kid and having family, thankfully, that supported that. That's I can't really stress that enough that whatever that childhood is like, being encouraged into the arts was something that I had on my side. And I can't take credit for that. It's just really cool family and supportive community that made the arts feel attractive and rewarded me for it. So yeah, since just being a little lad, I was always drawing, and my mom would talk about just you know me throwing hissy fits if I couldn't draw before school or draw when I got out of school, and I would get in trouble with teachers for drawing during class. It was just like a constant thing for me. So it's that's talent. I don't know, just thousands of hours of doodling on top of actual training. So in in high school, I was really fortunate to have a really, really fantastic art teacher. I think without her, I don't know what you'd call that, like the divine connecting of that happening, because she's made several professional artists that are still painting and drawing in our community now that all went through her high school time. It's just a pivotal time for a young person to kind of start conceptualizing their future. So Susan Guthrie was a huge proponent of me pursuing the arts and doing trips to Europe and stuff like that were able to expose me to just master paintings, and that kind of broadened the scope of a little country boy like me, and it really was inspiring. So I think without her, I wouldn't be where I'm at. Um, but the training during high school is always just kind of you're in a mixed class with tons of skill levels, and I don't think I really got into it until I left high school to get into the academies. So I studied with the Bilmez family, so Semyon Bilmez and Daniel Bilmez, who you've actually interviewed. He
Yeah,
was one of
yeah,
my
I know
teachers.
Daniel. Oh, fantastic. Awesome.
Yep. Yep. And that was right out of high school. And I did a couple little stints. This is a little side story, but it's one that I always want to stress because I know again, people are listening to this podcast. Like I tried to go to the traditional college. I remember reading a Forbes article, for the best art schools in America, and seeing this Chicago Art Institute, the SAIC, and that was one of the top schools. And my parents saw the price tag for admission. I think it was like $40,000 a year back then. So who knows
Wow.
what it is now? But they thought, hold on, kid, we're going to send you to a summer program, and
Yeah.
that ended up saving me and them a ton of money and a lot of misery, because I realized very quickly that the aims I had as an artist, being inspired by the old masters and all that, was just like even though it was the finest art school in America, they had not a slightest idea on how to teach some of the fundamentals. And so without that interjection in my life, I don't think I would have ended up where I am or found my way into the academies as soon. And I noticed that going to the academies, that most of the students were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even having been let down by the school system in America, at least in the scope of learning traditional, the craft of picture making. So it was, I think, very fortunate that I kind of went that route and ended up in the academies like I did. And that's,
There's
a
a
whole nother
lot to
thing,
it.
but
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there about the art schools and academies, and I want to come back to that. But I'm curious because you touched on so many things there with that wonderful introduction. But how were your parents artistic at all? What were they in the arts? Were they a bit creative, crafty, or anything like that?
no, not at all.
Wow.
Really, actually, not at all. I mean, I would say that they probably both have the ability to like do some light sketching, but both are very, very, they both they run a small business together doing heating and air conditioning. So they're very, they're working people.
Yeah.
But what happened, I think the real feeding element of this is a bit of a family history because my grandpa, who I didn't get to meet, he died when my mom was only 16. So he actually was artistically inclined. He had studied at schools in England and was actually a professional draftsman before they had, computer aided design and all that. I mean, he actually would hand draw mechanical things and did, we have a portrait of Winston Churchill he did and stuff like that. So he really was artistically inclined, but in post-war England, he was always told that you can't have a family if you're going to be an artist. The kind of mythologies mixed in with lots of unfortunate facts, for people that it's definitely harder to manage things financially as an artist. But anyway, he had to kind of leave that behind. And I think my mom took that, and I'm literally named after him. So his name was Kenneth and I'm Kenneth. And I think there's been this weird kind of, uh, I don't know, like I kind of push from a whole nother level that's not driven by their own creative process necessarily, but by their just love for art and an honoring of him that's helped push that further.
That's fantastic because there's something definitely coming through in the work. So I'm looking at you here. For those fortunate enough to be watching the video version of this podcast, they'll be able to get a glimpse into the studio of Kenneth Yarus. And right now, I'm just looking at some epic paintings, brother, like really inspiring stuff. I do want to do a deep dive into the technical aspects of painting and really pick your brain there because I think I could learn a lot from you just from just hearing you unpack your process. But you touched on something there, and as you said it triggered something in me. So I went on a bit of a stint in January and on into February. Now we're in March, and I just started. I put down some of the videos I shouldn't have been watching. The conspiracy stuff. I was getting a little bit heavy into that kind of alternative media thing, and it was really hijacking my consciousness. And I went on this bender of just listening to personal development, some motivation stuff, some spiritual stuff as well. And I came across this book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. Highly recommend it for anybody in a creative business. Yeah, write that one down. And it's caused me to think about things in terms of myth and story. And you know about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Have you heard of that? Where
No, no.
well, it's a classic framework for narrative, and every movie that seems to do really well, or every book, or every kind of film or narrative that we seem to have as part of our pop culture, it kind of follows the same structure. And so I start looking at my life in terms of that structure as well. But what is it? I mean, it's the Avatar, it's the Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, it's the Dark Crystal. It's so basically you have a hero who encounters a problem. They're not a hero yet. They start off as something ordinary. Then there's a call, and then they see they need to rise to that call before they can become the hero, but they're missing a vital piece, and that's where the guide steps in. And so at that point in the story, when the guide steps in, they set the hero off on the journey, and the quest is laid out in front of them, and they have to make it through adversity to ultimately become the hero at the end, or heroine. And it doesn't matter what story we're listening to. And so as I was listening to your story, it suddenly just popped into my a long-winded way of putting this, but it popped into my mind. Where's the guide? Where's the guide? Because there's got to be a guide here in Kenneth Yaros's story, in this mythology, which is just beautiful. And you mentioned your high school teacher. Her name one more time?
It's Susan Guthrie.
Susan Guthrie. So can you take me back to the classroom? Because I mean, I won't wax on about my experience with high school. It didn't sound anything like yours. It was pretty terrible. But I can relate to drawing during class and getting in trouble for that. But what was that moment like of being in her class? And do you feel that that was really the thing then that set you off?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, well, man, it's Susan was absolutely the regular, I would almost say, like, boots on the ground element of mentor to me, where amongst all the chaos of high school, you're just emotionally wrecked, you're covered in acne, and just life's hell. I can't say I enjoyed high school either, but she was always the reprieve for me. Being able to, I remember actually skipping school attendance rallies or whatever they're called, where they'd have like these big stupid parades for sports and stuff that I just wasn't into, and being allowed to sneak back to the art classroom, and we'd have our little like art hideout in there with a couple of the other art nerds, and that kind of stuff was so empowering, and helps reinforce this that mythology that we have, that like art is an escape for me. And I think that started in those emotionally tumultuous times in high school, and she was just such a positive person. She is still to this day, and she's a friend still, which is awesome.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so there's her, and then even earlier than Susan, though, there's other mentors and quest guides, like you're talking about. That there's an actual world class illustrator that lives 3 houses down from me, that I had no idea about early on. My parents somehow found out, and when I'm 10 years old or 11 years old, whatever the heck I was, being allowed to go over there, and my parents saying, "Hey, my kid likes to draw. Can he come see your studio?" And getting my mind just torn asunder with the coolness of what was happening in there. I mean, it's the kind of like James Gurney level, like little armatures and sculptures and lighting, marionettes, and incredible sculptures of, or paintings of knights and dragons, and just like the coolest stuff. And so Greg Call, that's his name, and he's still a neighbor and still is rad. And those are the between him and that experience of seeing professional art walked out, and realistic art. He was a drawing. I remember getting prompts from him, that like the kind of hero's guide, like you're talking about, like, I want to draw scenes from The Hobbit. I just read the book and loved it or whatever. And he'd be like, okay, let's do thumbnails. And I'd go do my 5 thumbnails, come back, and he'd say, okay, go do 5 more. And I'd be all pissed, come back with 5 more, and he'd do one more time, go do 5 more thumbnails. So I'm going crazy. But
Yeah.
it's all stuff that, unbeknownst to me as a 13-year-old, but like it's a part of that creative process now that I think has given me a better handle on design. I mean,
Mm.
it's so much support was poured in to me in those pivotal years, that maybe it wasn't as structured and disciplined as what Michelangelo or, some of these old school guys that got way back in time. It kind of came from a mix of sources, but yeah, I owe so much to those people that were in my life at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much the wax on, wax off, and I think there's a lot of people that are starting out when they look at somebody like you, a professional artist that is just kicking these massive goals and doing these knockout paintings. I think there's always the assumption that somehow this is easy because the truth is you make it look easy, but they're not counting those wax on, wax off moments. And what is that? I mean, it's that repetition of the boring stuff. Um, and I don't know. Like when I look at artists now, such as yourself, I get insanely excited because I want to hear about those moments of boredom, of just the tedious, just almost dreariness of having to do the same thing over and over again, because it's repetition that drills these things so deep within your psyche, and so you're able to call upon them when it really counts. And again, I mean, I say wax on, wax off because it reminds me of Mr. Miyagi. We're gonna wax the car. Now we're gonna paint the fence, and then suddenly he's, well, what is all this? And then he throws a punch, and now suddenly he's blocking. He's doing all this stuff. So I mean, and there's another hero's journey for you, the Karate Kid. But it's really exciting. So you come out of high school, and then you go in and you start your next level of training. After that, when you're just branching out into becoming a professional artist, can you tell me about that moment in your life, in your artistic journey, and what that was like for you? How did you get, and maybe tell me about your first break there.
Sure, absolutely. So, well, and on a note, really quick with what you had just mentioned, something that I've always loved and lived, I've had as a background on my computer that touches on what you just mentioned is it's attributed to Aristotle, but it's apparently kind of a more 70s rewording of a longer essay of his, but it's something that I've come to rely a lot in my life and it might help some listeners out is um, excellence is not an act, but a habit. And
Oh, I love
that
that.
part, I guess the beginning part is we are what we repeatedly do. And so anyway, that saying has always kind of manifested to me with whether it was, even things like fitness, it's like you don't go to the gym and get strong after one session. Like things just take time and repetition. And the more at peace you can be, um, that's hard in our modern day where we want everything really fast. But anyway, yeah, that's just another, again, we could talk for hours about all that good stuff, but
But that is awesome. I mean, you are the accumulation of your habits. I want to throw another book out there just since you mention it, Atomic Habits by James Clear. That book is really kind of blowing up, and there's a lot of people that have gotten into that, and James Clear has just done fantastic with that book. But that's one of my favorites. I've listened to the audio version now 3 times, and it
oh, cool.
really drove into me that it's an accumulation, it's an aggregation of tiny little gains. And when you plot that out like a graph, that 1% improvement or that tiny little gain from a consistent habit ends up compounding over time. But the opposite is true of decreasing or at least continuing with the bad habits that you got, and then that accumulates and you start getting that graph going down the other way. And it really drilled into me that the power of good habits, but also, becoming a little bit more conscious about the artistic habits that I had, going back to those fundamentals. But so back to the trajectory here.
Sure.
Yeah, because I mean, in recent years, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've been looking at some of the posts you've been making on Instagram, and I'm just like, good night. This is world class painting. Bierstadt would be shuddering. He would be going, okay, I've got a rival here, And I'm not just saying that, bro. Like some of your stuff is just knockout crazy good. So you obviously not everybody starts off painting amazingly well. Like we all start somewhere, right? But when did you first realize you're like, oh shoot, I could actually make this work as a gig?
Well, yeah. So in that, the both questions where you're talking about, kind of how you get going and some advice I got really early on that made a huge difference, especially, coming from academies, there's this, and it's not bad, but the learning drive and the excellence obsession that they have is it can become handicapping. There can become this level where, like one of the things that felt stress to me, it maybe wasn't as verbal as I am making it out to be, but it's like you're not good enough yet. And that I think is a little damaging in that you kind of when you make work, a body of work, and you try to go sell it, and you're out into this other realm that's not in that insulated academia way where it's all about getting the perspective of the feet right or the angles of the muscles right or whatever, nuts and bolts that matter to artists. You do need to matter to other people. And so early on, getting into some of these Western art shows and even just having a rep, his name is Steve Caudry, and he's like a kind of a local legend. He helps manage his wife's art career, but he is just all business all the time. I mean, brutal business, and he's great at it, and he's hilarious. And he kind of took me under his wing and helped me get into some shows. And those little bits of propulsion really matter. And you start to see your work in frames, start to see your work getting observed by people, getting advertised. And I did these ballerina paintings that they're fine, they were great. And but they helped me understand that, like, you're going to end up doing this for money. And the ballerinas took off. I started having these like backlogs of ballerina paintings to do and kind of commissions for them. And I started getting this heart palpitation kind of thing of like, I hate this. I don't want to paint ballerinas. And
Wow.
realizing that, if you're not careful, you can get sucked down the rabbit hole on that. And, the galleries I work with still to this day, but I remember being kind of stressed out and asking them like, hey, what do I do right now? And he's like, you got to stop painting ballerinas. He's like, what do you want to paint? And I said, landscape. And being empowered in that way really opened the doors, because I was really trying to like fit into a scene or fit in with what was working. And that was going to go nowhere ultimately, as weird as that sounds. Like, it wasn't until I felt empowered to step onto my journey as an artist and getting away from the academia, getting away from how things should be done into this kind of new open realm has been so much more fun, but also successful, because I think now you're out there doing something kind of new, at least to a degree. I was like, Beardstat's been around doing that forever. So he's one of my big heroes. So
Yeah, Bierstadt's amazing. I mean, he's one of my favorites too. I don't remember ever seeing an original. I imagine I might have at some point, maybe as a kid back in the States, but most of what I've seen has just been reproductions. So I'd relish the opportunity to gaze upon an original and just stand there. But would you say, like, looking at some of the originals of him, and what were some of the European masters? Because you mentioned that you got to see some of those epic works. What are some of the standouts for you that impacted you?
well, I mean, we went through the Uffizi in Florence, and then
Yeah.
just being around Rome in general, and the Sistine Chapel, all those kind of huge, and a lot of them were frescoes. So they're not really like a painting; they're in that mural category at that point, but they're just that scale and the kind of, you know the reality that like a human hand made that, is it's Europe is full of that kind of just mind-boggling stuff. And we have big buildings here and some amazing stuff. They're all just concrete and machinery, but it's like this was hand carved by dudes, and people died making some of those buildings. So I wouldn't say it was even just one particular masterpiece of being, that changed me in that, but in just seeing the scope of what human hands and minds can do, and just having that kind of just blow my lid, just was amazing. And the real shift, I mean, if I want to think about that kind of, it was in New York City. So going to academies and struggling with kind of what do I do now? And I left school early. It's kind of a rebel. Didn't do anything right. But in New York was where I was really having an identity crisis, struggling with depression. I mean, New York City is horrible. But that's coming from a country kid. A lot of people that love it there. Obviously, 10 million of them do, but it's horrible. It's a nightmare in every possible way, really. But the
I want
Met
to
was like the ultimate
apologize to New
reprieve.
Yorkers right now. Sorry, New
I've
Yorkers.
They can email me, and I will.
Direct all
I
complaints to Kenneth Yarus.
I made it a year, and that was, people said if you make it two, you're stuck. You'll find your little groove in the city, and and you'll get stuck there. And so I left after a year. So my time at GCA, so I went to the Ashland Academy of Art and then moved to the Grand Central Academy of Art, and that was when they were right in Manhattan. So it was, it's just circumstances. I had to live in a little tiny doghouse apartment with another dude for literally. I mean, the stories in New York are so many and so bad, but it was a great time of challenge, which is what a young man needs. And back to how art really felt like a reprieve, and that I would get to go to the Met and see just these, felt like breaths of fresh air, and that reminder that what I was doing in academies mattered, and that the training that brought these pieces to life was similar training to what I'm doing now, was always a constant pat on the back. But I would go and stand in front of this Thomas Moran painting,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's just a scene of the Tetons. And I did a study after of it a couple of years ago, but that painting changed my life, because I would sit there in the midst of my homesickness and just hating New York and see pine trees, and I could feel that cold air and the sun on the mountain. I literally almost cried several times looking at it and being so homesick and longing, but also it helped galvanize that, like, that's where I belong. I can't help but feel that. And so
Hmm.
that painting drove me kind of back west and back into the realm of landscape. Because I'd been studying portraiture, and I mean, from early age, I always loved illustration and stuff. So I felt like a bit of a nomad for a while there. But that painting really was like the landing lights that I needed to say, "Go home. This is where it needs to be."
You know, when I was going through art school, the lecturers said something to me. It was the darndest thing. They're like, I had some painting lecturers, almost bad mouth painting, certainly traditional painting. And it was all about concept. It was in the academic world, it's all about the idea. And I came to find that it was actually an utter lack of ideas. It was quite funny. But what you describe there is almost a spiritual experience that you're having in front of a work, but it's not a worshiping of the work like some sort of idol. It's not, you're not looking at the work. It sounds almost like what the artist was doing as well was touching on something that I feel as humanity, we all have that in common, that we're trying to search for something greater and something more. And we find it and connect to it instantly when we're in the presence of nature and creation. And there's something that just draws our spirit out. I find that so much in the landscape, but then when you get, in the hands of a talented artist, like our heroes from the past, they hit that nerve. They're like, no, this is what you're looking for. And so for something that's universal, for something that is so, human, it almost feels like home in a real deep sense. It seems like such an insane thing to then want to drive that out of a person when they're funneled through this bottleneck of the academic system. It's like, no, 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 that's been done. So we can't do that anymore. Well, who says so? Who cares? Like this is, and that's the one thing I got. That was my criticism that I received was this is no longer a valid form of expression. I don't see anything that could be more valid than touching that nerve within yourself because the authenticity shines through and your authenticity, man, just comes through and it's this consistency over that body of work. So I'm glad. Look, I'm sure the ballerinas were awesome. I think you're probably being a little bit too hard on yourself there, but the work now, man, I'm glad you went for the landscapes because these are shocking. They're beautiful. So take me back then. So you're starting off as a professional. Now your agent has kind of taken you under the wing. Where did that first big break come through? Did you have a solo show, or was there commissions that started to mount up? Professionally speaking, when did you see those cogs really start to turn for you?
It's unfortunately, I can't really claim that there's been a break, and hopefully that can be a consolation to folks listening that like, I can be one of those kind of grinded out people. It just took there was a show that happens in Great Falls. I actually just did it again a couple weeks ago. There's a Montana artist named Charlie Russell who died, a long time ago. He was just a Montana cowboy artist, and he there's a museum there and lots of they do a whole for his birthday. There's a whole thing called Western Art Week over there, Charlie Russell Days, and all these artists get together. But getting a room there and where I could display my art, it all happens in this weird hotel. It's one of those kind of local things. It's a Montana thing, but it was sorry, just it was enough of that. What I mentioned earlier, where you are putting your work in front of people and repping it yourself. So it wasn't like it wasn't like an art in the park. It's a little bit above art in the park, but
Mhm.
but a kind of similar thing where you're just there repping your paintings and that experience was so beneficial because I was around lots of professional artists and welcomed in, which was really nice, even though I made really bad stuff in that era. There was fans that you develop and people that loved watching me progress that were excited to see me come back the next year. So I can't really discount that those kind of seemingly trivial, like I think it'd be easier for a lot of artists to say, well, I'm not going to do a thing like that, or I don't want to, go to that level, or I don't know how people think that they deserve something to happen good for them, whether it's a gallery or a big show or whatever. That it felt like they grind it out every year. I'd make 15, 20 paintings for that show. And when I couldn't get other galleries, that was kind of my big thing. And I was working other jobs and definitely not a professional artist, but I think there was roots growing, underneath the ground, even though there was just a little crappy leaf on top, stuff was happening, and I don't want to discredit that era of, I mean, I'm talking 5, 6 years probably. And it wasn't until I moved kind of back to Montana and was able to basically move into this studio and with the support of my family kind of be told go full time. And with that, I gave myself a 5-year window saying, okay, if I can't, this doesn't make sense in 5 years, and it's gonna call it and go do something else. And in that 5 year span, it's been amazing and worked, but the big break never really happened. It's been just a slow slog and saying yes to things. There's a good movie called Yes Man. I think it's
Yeah,
got Jim
yeah,
Carrey in it.
yeah. I've heard of
And
that one.
I think of that like you just have to say yes to stuff. You show up to paint outs, you show up to gallery stuff, you show up to art events, and it slowly starts to shape into this career. And hopefully the next 5 years are just more of that. And I've had solo shows the last 4 or 5 years, and they've all been great and sold well. And it's I think none of them have been some big game changer, but they all are a confirmation that I'm going the right way. And it's super nice to have galleries be behind me. There's a lot, and I know you've mentioned, worked with lots of artists on this podcast with different approaches. And so far I've been one on the gallery defense. I've stood by them, and there's definitely, I feel stressed by that a lot, but at the same time, it's worked for me.
So, okay, let's stay there for a second. So, stressed by that. What is the what's the cause of that stress, do you think? Do you mind going there?
Sure. No, I mean, it's the as most artists know, there's that commission loss when the gallery sells stuff. They're taking a cut, so you're generating so much possible income, right? I can make so many of these paintings back here a year, and the reality of getting less than that and being responsible for framing it myself, there's a kind of you know feels sometimes like an axe blade that's right there, and
Wow.
I think
Wow.
when I see the internet's expanded, and I know you're a huge proponent of that, and knowing your history too with having the galleries, just disappear on you, it's a very real thing for me too. Like it's just something I'm aware of, and I would say I'm suspicious of. It's like I love my galleries, but I'm always kind of like, well, at any minute they might just be gone. And that part's the stressful part. But at the other time, the other aspect of things, I'm sitting here painting and doing what I want to do, and checks just come in the mail, and that's so nice because I hate business. I hate running things. I mean, having to ship things and package things and all that is just a nightmare for me. And so it's so great to be able to just like drive to a gallery, drop off work, and just get checks over the summertime. I mean,
Yeah.
it's it's been so attractive for me as a painter, and then seeing other artists that I look up to and emulate in their career arc, that there's a kind of trust, that the galleries are out there schmoozing and being in front of the eyes that I would maybe have a harder time reaching in the internet way. A lot of my collectors are probably in their 70s or 80s even. So whether or not they're following me on Instagram is fairly unlikely, but
Mhm.
there's there's just been, I guess I've built myself into that with the galleries. And there's, when you step away from galleries, like right now, if I was to say, oh, I'm going to go do everything on my own, I know that I wouldn't be able to make what I make with the galleries. Maybe sometime it would add up, but it would come at great expense to me. And
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
try to rationalize that the expense I pay them is somehow worth whatever it would cost me to handle all the shipping and emailing and schmoozing and rent and everything else you got to pay extra of that I currently can just hang out here and paint. And I love that.
You're selling it well, I must say, because I've had a terrible attitude towards galleries in the past. I must admit, and even recently, and I kind of go back and forth and back and forth, and maybe people listening to the podcast, because I've probably been doing the podcast over the last 3 years on and off, and people that are familiar and have listened to the episodes might just be going, Tish, just make up your mind on it already. But there is something to be said to delegating those tasks towards to other people who can handle it, let's face it, better than you could. And if that's their strength, and then let them go ahead and have it. And this insulates you and protects that creative time. And if there's one thing that's actually really frustrating me at the moment, it's not getting enough time to create. And so it's been a challenge, personally speaking, because I constantly find myself in a position where I'm stuck in my business and doing business stuff, and it takes an enormous amount of time. Um, but the commission is the other side of things. But rather than looking at it as giving money away for nothing, I mean, I think you really highlight there the valuable service that they provide for that fee. Depending on the commission rate, of course. Now, I won't be rude and ask you how much you're paying in commission, but you've got a couple of galleries that represent you. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I think I've got 6 maybe. I got it there.
Oh, wow. I got that
I'm
wrong.
in a sit
Okay. A few
oh yeah,
galleries.
I'm in a situation where I have more galleries and interests than I can make paintings, which is the challenging piece. I feel kind of like
Fantastic.
I'm juggling things and always letting somebody down. If I get 5 paintings to this gallery, then this gallery just sold 2 and they want 4, and then these guys, it's this. I feel like I'm putting fires out. Like just running around, and that's not a complaint. Like I'm very, very, very fortunate to have that demand going for my work, and I'm, you know, it's just for the personal journey of it. It's kind of hard because I'm a people pleaser, and that experience is a little, like I said, creatively, you get put into this little bit of a pressure cooker there, where you're trying to make people happy and make art that you want. And what's one of my, you know, standards there is just like trying to keep the quality of the work high, and that being everything. I could probably make more money if I could paint faster. I could probably make more money if I painted something slightly different and added some narrative stuff that would help the painting sell, whatever. Those are things that I don't want to compromise on. And thankfully, yeah, I've got a lot of galleries, and it's, I think, something that, if there's listeners that want to know more about that kind of gallery element, which I know you have a lot of people asking, how do you get into them? I have never had to apply to a gallery. There wasn't some going through the
Fantastic. Yeah.
process. It's always been word of mouth, maybe doing those things, again, saying that yes man thing, showing up to paint outs, showing up to uh, shows with good work. I mean, I think if you make good paintings, that's that's your number one concern as an artist, whether you sell it himself or you're going to trust other people with that process. Like, you got to make sweet stuff. Don't think a gallery is some you know, magical thing that they're going to sell things for you just because they're a gallery. Like, you have to make work and you have to believe in it. And if that's going, then I've had galleries and lost galleries and gained more galleries, and I'm sure they'll close or change over time. But it's okay to trust that process. If the work happening in the studio is solid, then the rest of that kind of happens. Um, and if I needed to do it on my own, if I wanted to, like, I think it's like you said, there's a business thing that you got to take seriously. If you're going to step away from the gallery trusting it, then it does become your job to become a new professional in a different way. And I just don't want to do it yet. A lot of artists I know are doing so well selling on their own, and it is tough to see the commission cost. I keep track of it, so I always sell, when I have a spreadsheet. Whenever I sell paintings, I mark what that retail value was and whatever that commission is. So every year I see it, and it's sobering, But at the same time, I know them as people. The galleries I work with are all friends of mine, so it feels a lot better, knowing that it's employing people and providing community service. That's something that I love. Galleries, I love going to them. I think it's so fun that they're a part of our life, and as humans, it's such a cool thing. So that does take us artists also being a part of that process. But yeah, it's tough. I
Yeah.
won't say there's one way better than the
Yeah.
other, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you are selling it, man. You are selling it because when you say that, yeah, and you're right. They're people. They're people too, and they do provide a valuable service. And shout out to Colin and Gay from Perth, Western Australia, my first agents, because that's when that first really hit home for me, that these are people, and they got your best interest at heart, and they're representing you to the best of their ability, and really putting you out there. And it's got to be worth something for sure, for sure. But while this is all happening, like you've got your own website, you've got social media, you're doing all that side of stuff as well. So I don't want to get you in trouble here in case one of your galleries, is paying attention to this. But are you thinking in terms of, despite being happy with the gallery model, are you thinking in terms of building up this personal brand? Because there's one thing that has come about in the last decade, and that is, this notion of the personal brand, because it's not just what you produce, it's you. And Kenneth Yarus is an entity that you can now go and follow right now on social media. Like, this is a paradigm shift, and that can be the foundation for a business as well. But is this something that you kind of toyed with or thinking about? Because I mean, you're posting amazing stuff, and it's always just, hey, just sharing the latest thing from the studio. That's really cool. But I don't know, is there something there in the future that you think could work?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the diversification piece is something that COVID, I think, was a one of the big teachers of, like, again, like in the paradigm element you're talking about. And I'd say with the gallery, or simplified even more, just the retail concept, that there's a store people have to go to buy something. I mean, that's being challenged worldwide, society wide. It's, whether or not people like to go shopping or want to go down to a gallery or do something. It's a brand new frontier. This is, and that is a cool thing. And I'm a big techno nerd. I love computers and stuff. And so for me, there's definitely been an awareness of all of that, and the reality, if you sell something on your own, you do make significant more money, which is great, but you're also able to then interact with people and your fans and stuff. So I try to do, have a healthy awareness of both of those things, because I think that, again, without discrediting my galleries, have worked their butts off for years and have created me into this thing, and they've got buyers that if I send them work, they have got people they can email to do it. And again, I love not having to do that. So um the thing that I have started and been trying to do, which is hard, is getting into the YouTube element. And you're a major hero for that. I mean, when I think of, I almost get a kind of imposter syndrome. It's like, man, there's already so many amazing content creators that, like, what do I really have to bring to the table here? And that's a scarcity concept that doesn't help me to think like that. So I try to, like, shoo that part of my brain that wants to come up with that kind of negativity. But ultimately, I think that, price point wise, and in a business idea, right? This is advice I actually got from a art dealer that I really loved, and it ties into, say, your brand making. If you think of guys like Mark Maggiore, even, where there's galleries he works with, and there's professional support that he can rely on, but there's also still this the reality that, like, you are this engine that's creating the art. You're creating some of that hype. It's not going to be solely up to a gallery anymore to do that stuff, and that's just the nature of the age we're in. So it's hard for artists that maybe want to be introverted and stay home and not do anything, because I don't know if you'll be able to get away with that in the next 20 years, since we all got
Mm.
to be our personal celebrity. um, but the main point that I wanted to stress about that was, like, basically in the financial game, there's a ton of people that can afford something for $100, right?
Mhm.
And there's
Mhm.
way fewer people that can buy something for $100,000. So there's this pyramid element, and trying to build your base and your followers with affordable things that they can love and cherish, and that's a ties into kind of the pricing thing too. But, like, I want to be able to offer a broad range of things that can support that base building. And as your pyramid grows and that point gets taller and you're reaching maybe that fame that will happen sometime as an artist, it might be till I'm 60 or 70, but by then, hopefully I've built this big base that just supports that really special fine painting that I can make in 20 years that's going to be amazing. But it happens now, and it happens with people buying cards or YouTube video, the workshops and stuff like that. I mean, they're all a part of that building. And so I think that as artists, we have to be able to manage all of that, and think about how we're growing our future, because you can't control everything, but you definitely want to have fans out there. And if you go out and just want to hit those top 1% people and sell something for 100 grand right off the bat. It's like, sorry, it might not happen. I mean, it does happen. You hear about people getting really crazy lucky with that stuff, but I think
Hmm.
that with the internet, you have that ability to reach that broader margin, where you can sell something for $50 or $100 to thousands of people, and now you made 100 grand. So you don't want to underestimate the reach of social media and the opportunity to bring in fans into your fold, and they might not be the ones that buy a $10,000 painting, but they might buy something from you, and that's pretty dang
Hmm.
cool. So it's tough. I sell most of my big expensive things through galleries, but I want to use the internet to reach a different kind of audience and sell a different type of product. And, you know, to be honest, I hate social media. I hate Instagram.
Wow.
I hate
Tell
trying
it.
I hate the runaround. And it's all an AI thing. That's with TikTok and everything becoming these reels, and that's maybe what's drawn me more to say YouTube, where I can do long format videos. I can do a 10-minute long video where I can talk about my process and actually share and connect with people. And I'm not just this scroll bait, spam stuff that's turning us all into goldfish. Like I really don't like so much of that. So I'm trying to use the platform as I can, but the reality is I want to be a part of a different thing. And so I'm hoping that YouTube can be that whenever I can designate more time to it, because I freaking tapped out right now. But yeah, social media is tricky. I really don't like what it does for my
Mm,
mental health. And there's a documentary called The Social Dilemma that I think people should check out, because it does
mm,
kind of highlight and you even mentioned it, like, the rabbit holes you can kind of get sucked into, and
absolutely. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's, I think, actually kind of a dangerous thing for society. And art obviously being the really cool part about it. I mean, sharing art, and I think of the
Mhm.
old school Instagram where it was just photos and art, and that was it, but it's
Mm.
turned into this other monster. And so I don't like supporting it, but it is where people are now. So it's tricky. So it was a big tirade all over
No,
the place.
no, I not at all. I love it, and that's what the podcast is all about. It's a series of dirt roads in the middle of nowhere, and we're just going to take a hard left or a hard right into things, and that's what I love is exploring these topics because it brings so much color to who you are. I mean, look, to be honest, I build up this mental image of what Kenneth Yarus is all about, and then when I meet you, I'm like, wow, there's just such depth here, and it's just such a cool. It's such a pleasure to meet you finally, and have this chance to really talk with you. But you mentioned something there, and I chuckled to myself because the irony is, I'm going to take that little bit where you're hating on social media, I'm going to turn that into an Instagram reel and post it. so, so literally, you're going to be talking about hating people, scrolling on their phone, and then there's Kenneth Yarus. What do you say? Hey, bring that back.
Oh man,
But
it
yeah.
feels like a necessary evil, or whatever. You can't escape it.
Well, I think it's by design. I really think it's by design. And there are, we're fed this pack of garbage where all of these platforms or companies are started by some genius in their garage. And it's just not true. If people want to dig into the backstory of some people, the names are fake, the places are fake. I mean, call me a conspiracy theorist. I don't care. But what we need to do is actually really look at this stuff and realize that a lot of this stuff is by design. And then my question is why? And at the end of the day, I think this is a spiritual thing, just my personal take on it. And it's trying to remove us from what's important. I mean, it's a bit like your art, for instance. We could celebrate your art, which really, for me, hits that button and touches the divine. It's a reminder of what's really important. And you could look at that. And we could think about what you charge versus the person who duct taped the banana to the wall, this is a thing that's going on. And I think ultimately, whether we're talking about technology and social media and these platforms, I think at the end of the day, they're robbing us of who we really are on a deep level. And your art, again, brother, your art just really, it reminds us that there's more important things. There are things that are vastly important, And so whether you're working with a gallery or selling it direct or whatever, I'm just glad you're out there doing it because it's I think it gives us permission. This is the other thing as well. You mentioned so much there, but the other thing as well is that you're an authentic guy, and it's kind of cool to hear that you went through that pain point early on, going, "Hang on a second, I want to do this anymore. I'm about the landscapes. I want to do the landscape stuff." So that's super inspiring too. But while we're on the subject, I mean, you mentioned you're a bit of a techno guy, so it's interesting. You hate on social media, but at the same time, you like technology. What are your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, AI is a big deal right now.
Mm,
I I love elements of it. I was actually just talking with my buddy Nate Clausen when we were driving out to that art show, and we were talking about AI. And one of the things that I think the structure, like even so for a fine artist like me, I don't feel particularly bothered by it. The whether or not somebody wants to buy something that's printed out that AI made is it's up to them. I don't see that being super valuable long term, but I'm out of touch with most people and how things work in the modern world, and I'm okay with that. But when I talk about the thumbnails that I have to do, or I'm working on these design things, like I definitely could see the tool element saying, okay, AI, I've got these 5 different reference photos that I took of this area. Hit me with some stuff. Let me see what you got. Does this create a spark to say, oh yeah, this tree was moved here? Because I'm doing that all the time. I'm not at all a photo painter. I'm always rehashing stuff, and so I could see the AI being a useful tool in that instead of me wasting 2 hours sitting there doodling it all, just saying generate and have it be done in 8 seconds or 1 second, being given that kind of creative fodder and something that I would do, but maybe not to that level. And I think of the stuff that like uh Dibble does. I can't even remember his first name. Is it Dave? David Dibble. Just
right.
mad scientist style rehashing of compositions, and like
Right. Yeah.
it's so fantastic. And obviously your own artistic vision comes through that process, but I could see AI being a useful tool in that way. But realistically, paintings made with the human hand and the human expression will still always be valuable to people somewhere. And in my other nerd side, because I still love video games, and I always wanted to be a video game designer and worker. And one of the big holdups for me to be able to make my own game is assets. If I want to make a tree, that's a huge amount of labor to render it and skin it and do all the UV mapping and everything else required to make this asset. That now you can just say, hey, AI machine, make me 5 trees, and boom, you got 5 trees for your game. So I can see like cool things happening from it. But you know, that's tough because some guy that designs trees for computer games is probably sweating right now.
He's
That's
freaking out right now, dude.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's a broader, deeper discussion into like
Mm,
kind of what matters, and that's a hard thing for our society right now. I think there's some in that paradigm shift that you're talking about. There's an element of like we have a downtown in our like most towns have a downtown, right? But half of it's empty. It's just it is. Like it or not, I mean, I shop at Amazon. Most humans just shop at Amazon here in America, and it's
mhm.
killing the downtown, but none of us are behaving differently. And you're gonna have to have that crisis kind of like what matters then? You know, what is downtown if it wasn't just a shopping area? You think about all the way back to medieval times, it's like that's where people bought and sold stuff. Happens to be on the internet now. So we have these internet downtowns, but what's this
Mm.
new value going to be in our real town? What really matters to us when it's not just crap anymore, just stuff, like hopefully they get turned into places for community, and hopefully there's more room as computers take over these jobs that humans can hopefully enjoy other things in life and they don't have to just work all the time. That's the like utopian me thinking that hopefully that AI and some of these speeding processes up allow more freedom for humans and more people can become artists, and maybe it'll be more galleries down there. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear people talking about, some sort of universal basic income as a way for, your basic needs to be met as a result of this process that is kind of shifting everything towards automation and these computerized systems, whether it's driven by AI or some sort of mechanized process. A big industry that I think is going to be quite, yeah, uh, displaced, let's put it that way, is going to be the transport sector. Whether you're a cab driver or an Uber driver or a truck driver, as things kind of move towards this automation, those people are going to be out of a job, and you're looking at potentially millions of people. And that is a huge concern. And that's something that some people might go, well, okay, well, that's going to cut costs and efficiency, and maybe there might be some sort of environmental payoff there or whatever. But I think ultimately the human cost, that's almost immeasurable. Somebody that's put their life into that, and that's part of their identity. That's an incredibly painful thing to have to go through. Life changing or earth shattering for somebody in that position. And I'm concerned about that. But you said something very interesting about, something made by the human hand. So you're not particularly concerned about AI from that standpoint, which is kind of a refreshing thought as well, because there are artists right now that are freaking out. Like, some artists are really excited about it because suddenly they see this as an opportunity and they're using it as in their process. I am not one of those people. I've had a few people comment on some of my digital art videos going, hey, AI's got you whipped. And that might be, but it's fascinating to see the different sides to this. And I don't know if there's a right or a wrong here just yet. I think this is still, it's so new that we're starting to really, it's interesting watching people find their feet. Let's put it that way. But personally, my concern with it is that anytime you have a paradigm shift that shakes the bedrock of the economy, there are flow-on effects that you don't quite anticipate. And I've explained this in the podcast before, and the people that follow me at my online academy, link in the show notes, by the way, um, they'll hear from the talks that I give on art business that, you know, in the past, when I lost my business, and hopefully people can learn from that so they don't have to go through the same thing. When that happened, it was an unintended consequence. There was a downturn in the resource sector where China stopped buying iron ore. So where I was kind of getting established as a professional artist, that was the backbone of the Western Australian economy, was iron ore exports. And so when China stops importing that and manufacturing steel, they just say, no, no, no more. We're good for now. Suddenly you have the mining companies just laying off wholesale, just executives and people working there. And these are people that make money and they buy stuff. And one of those things that they buy is like a nice painting to hang on the wall. And now suddenly my waiting list goes from like a few dozen people to cut in half to gone. And it reminds me of that South Park episode where the guy's gone, and it's gone, and that was very much what it was. And I didn't see that coming. Man, that was like getting slapped upside the head with a cold fish. It was just a rude awakening. I'm like, what is going on? So I think we might be facing another one of those. And I'm not sure what form it's going to come in yet, but I think the displacement of people will have a flow-on effect for us artists. Yes, there's the creative concerns, of course, always, but still, there's got to be demand for what you do. And I believe that very much, because you can't outsource that. You can't delegate that. It has to be created by Kenneth Yarus with his brush.
Yeah, that's maybe, and to tie it into the kind of modern branding of things, like AI art's just not that interesting. I mean, the story of it isn't interesting. There's a couple of nerd friends I have that are, they'll get crazy about it, but people as a whole, humans, if there's something that's true through all of this craziness of life and the human experience, is that we are communal animals. We connect and share together, and computers, I don't think, I mean, there's I guess I won't say anything because who freaking knows what's going to happen. But I know that that's one of our deeper drives. And so for people to buy one of my paintings, it's not just because of one of my paintings. It's because of every painting up to that point, of what I stand for as an artist in person to what they stand for as a person and collector. I mean, there's so much that AI can't touch there that I'm not tremendously worried by it. And on those other fronts, economically, that is a whole can of worms, absolutely. And I'm curious to watch the next 50 years if I get them, to watch what happens as
If any
society
of us get them.
grapples. Yeah, it's the and I think of that with even a couple hundred years ago, most of us were farmers. Most humans had to be. And
Yeah.
I've actually worked in an organic farm and we do a pretty serious family garden here. And it's one of the things that I think people take for granted as just food, but like how much work it is and
Oh
what a pain
man.
in the ass that is. I'm very lucky to get to paint all day because my hands are nice and clean and my back doesn't hurt and I'm not out in the rain and like the farmers and where food comes from is messy hard work. And if it wasn't for farm machinery, you think of what a combine harvester took over for thousands of people's jobs were taken, but they freed them up in other ways in the economy. So it's something that I try to use to dispel some of that freak out sensation, that hopefully with human creativity and connection, there's just more jobs to be made as more of these other jobs are taken away, that we still keep making more humans. And somehow there's things for us all to do somehow, including jobs that we're only, I mean, God, I think of the people that get to play video games on the internet now, like Twitch and all that. Like, if you told me, high school me, that I could have just kept playing Counter Strike and made more money than an NFL player, like, I mean, that's freaking amazing. That's all new stuff. Those are new jobs and new monies, and humans have an insatiable need for entertainment.
Mm.
At Like you said, there's a spiritual cost to that, I think, too. But yeah, there's some weird times behind, weird times ahead. It's all pretty crazy.
I'm still gonna stick to something that I've said though, and I still believe this firmly, and maybe in a way I have to believe it, but I don't think there's ever been a better time to be an artist. And I'll say that maybe this opens up another tangent, but which I welcome. Um, but it's funny how we were talking about Beer Stop before, and just what a badass that guy was, and even you mentioned Thomas Moran, another one of my favorites. Um, and I think we have the tendency to put these guys on a pedestal, but I imagine what it would have been like to be in that day and age, because there's probably hundreds more artists that we never heard of that were just trying to get the break at that time as well. But I don't know what it is. Maybe we just kind of assume that there was something in the water back then, and we deified these people. We put them on this pedestal, and it's unattainable what they were able to achieve. We can't do that today. But I would go as far to say that there's some artists that are alive today working that are, you know, equal in terms of their skill and how they deposit the paint. I'm just continually blown away. But it's the opportunities that we have now. Galleries are still here, but we have this whole new world that's opened up. I mean, for goodness sake, you're over there in the United States. Here I am in the South Island of New Zealand. We're having a conversation in real time on the internet, on video, HD video, and whereas before, if I wanted to talk to Kenneth Yarus and it's 1850, good luck. I'm going to send you a letter, and 6 weeks later, maybe it gets to you. If it's 6 months,
6 months. Oh yeah, man.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
It's insane.
It's crazy. And I think that I would stand by that too. The now is incredible. And the from what I have learned from just biographies and the stuff I've just gained learning about these older artists, and back to the stuff I saw in Europe, that like you had to have a king vouch for you or a church. I mean, the per capita rate of being an artist was just minuscule. I mean, I think that's where you see craft and art being so separated, was that you could be an artist and that you carved stuff and did work, and could be an artistic person back in the medieval times. But if you were an actual artist of name, of which we probably have a couple thousand worldwide, I mean, now there's millions of us artists out there. And that's what's so cool about the modern day, is that the paradigm that existed, as much as we might hate galleries or might hate the internet, it's way better than having to, wait for some king to decide for me, that I can be an artist. We have our destiny much more in our hands now. And that's pretty freaking cool.
Hmm. Yeah, it is, and I think that it's important to just stop for a second and check in with these things. I think, there's a lot to be said for just being grateful, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
That's unfortunate. I mean, it's not unfortunate. I think it's in that spiritual realm, there's so much that just thankfulness covers, that we all, at least in America, we're just driven so hard for more, and to consume, and to have, and thankfulness just destroys that. I mean, it just stops it in its place, where you can be like, oh, I'm thankful for what I have, and that's it's so powerful and so deep. And I
Mm.
think that it's not stressed enough, at least in America. It's kind of counterculture to be thankful in a way, but it's really where freedom is.
Freedom. I'm a big freedom guy. I'm all about it.
And I
You know,
love something I'm into a lot lately is Stoic philosophy.
oh yeah, yeah. Okay, excellent. Tell me about that. I just finished a book by Ryan Holiday, which is "Discipline is Destiny." I think the title was. But have you gotten into that one?
Not into that one. I'm gonna write it down here because I
Okay.
think you read many more books than I get into.
Well, just on that though, Kenneth, because I'm not a reader. Okay, I don't read. I hate reading. I just don't like it. I don't see the sense in sitting down and doing that because I'm so busy with the business, and then I want to draw something, I want to paint something, but I'm a listener. So I think, we have this thing now, and I guess people call that reading books. I don't know if it counts, but I've got quite an Audible budget that I'm building up every month. And
Heck yeah, man.
yeah,
I will stand by that as reading. It's
okay,
so annoying.
good, good.
People are like, you didn't read that book. It's like, oh my God, whatever. Like, I didn't sit there and turn the pages, but I'm with you, Audible all the way. And
Yeah.
there's some books that I think are, kind of heady or something. I got to almost take notes from them, and
Hmm.
Audible hasn't
Hmm.
suited me well for some of those reads. But I am a big time Audible guy. I'm with you. If you can
Well,
paint
I couple
and
that,
learn,
I couple it with the app called Short Form. So when you're listening to an audiobook and then you want to find that title, not sponsored by the way, if you're listening to this, but just a fan. Some of the books though that I've listened to haven't come up on short form. So I listened to this David Goggins book, which is just mind blowing, called Never Finished, and I tried to find the notes of that one, if I'm remembering correctly, and I couldn't find notes in short form. Mind you, it probably didn't lend itself to notes per se, but short form will give you a summary and a synopsis and then expansion in particular areas, and I found that to be quite beneficial. Um, but stoicism, tell me about that because I've look, you'll know a bit more about that than me. I've only just begun to dabble my toes in there. After having a bit of a chat to John Fennerov, who's a big fan of Stoicism, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that because it's super fascinating.
oh yeah, I mean, and I am so far from being, intellectually up to par on my stoicism and my reading of it. I've gotten most of the way through Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is one of the kind of pillars of
Hmm.
Stoic
Hmm.
philosophy, and that he was just one of the more well documented writers of it. But Stoicism is tied back to, way back into Western civilization, and tying some of these old paintings, old art, the ideas and principles kind of driving them. It is so hard not to touch on stoicism, and the kind of, the way you think about reality and what matters, because beauty and nature are things you hear repeatedly in the kind of quotes and thoughts, and good and evil, and what's right and wrong. I mean, all those things, the philosophical entertainment of those ideas has always been interesting to me. Even when I was like a little kid, I remember like getting books on Aristotle, like when I was like in high school, and not understanding anything. And I still don't understand it in a fully philosophical kind of way. Like, whether what ideas he's, you know, proposing, and what reason and logic they're made up, all that stuff is too heady for me. But it's the overall gist of them is so appealing to me. I didn't grow up with a religion. My family didn't teach us any particular spirituality. So I think I turned to it as a way of trying to understand the spiritual realm, and having those notions. Like you said, there's times where you can't help it as a human, but you feel drawn to something, and whether that's that truth or goodness, or when you see something that's evil and bad and you can't really describe why or how it's that way, but it, that there's some deep stuff there. And Stoic thought is so ingrained in our society in the Western end of things that like you just kind of take some of them assumptions for granted, and then they become almost colloquial. Memento mori is one of the ideas there that like it's basically just remember that you're gonna die. It's kind
Wow.
of
Yeah.
morbid,
Yeah.
but memento mori is one of those. When you think about that and you think that way, it changes your present, it changes how you are in the moment, and that's powerful. And so I think that Stoic thought has always just tied me back to the kind of the roots of right now. It becomes almost a spiritual practice in how you overcome suffering and how you work for what matters, and avoid kind of what the world and the noise says. It kind of gives you this shelter from the chaos of things. And I've loved that about Stoic thought, and it's close to, there's a lot of, Buddhism has some similar principles. I mean, in Christian thought jumps right into Stoic thought. Stoic started a little earlier than some of the Christian principles, but they all just meshed into Western civilization as we know it. So I think it's so
Mhm.
cool for people to read that stuff and see that there's some of these sayings are like, oh, that hasn't changed. Even though we have cell phones and all this crazy stuff that they would have never believed, humans are still the same. What we suffer from is still the same. And the antidote is also right there, and it's normally right here between our ears if you can take stewardship of it, which is a lot of what you know a lot of stoicism happens there.
It's interesting because I think so many of us artists are run by emotions, and that was a big takeaway for me. Again, just dabbling my toe in there, going, "Oh, this seems like a bit of a framework for first getting yourself under control. Realizing the nature of who and what you are, and controlling that raw emotional energy, and really taking a good hard look at yourself and taking personal responsibility. As a Christian, people have, and I've had debates with people and conversations with people about it, and it's a kind of a relatively new thing for me. I've only been a Christian for the last 4 years, but when I try to describe it to somebody who isn't, I just kind of say, well, you know, yes, Lord and Savior, and all of that, and I love Jesus, but ultimately it's a code of ruthless personal responsibility. And I find myself, I have to continually check back into that. I have to continually take stock of that. Where am I at? Am I living true to my word? Because that's one thing that we've got to be is kind of is honest, and honest with ourselves. Because you're not going to lie to God, are you? And get away with it. But oh man, this went down one of those dirt roads real fast. I love it. But there's something here. Let's bring it back to the art, because there's something about this where, if you're taking personal responsibility and you're going for this thing that is so important to you and the driving force behind your career, it's going to take discipline. So would you describe yourself, because the evidence bears out, you do appear from the outside to be a very disciplined person. I mean, because the evidence is sitting right there. I'm looking at it in your studio. That takes hard work, that you're not going to get around the amount of time that's going to take to develop those techniques. So run me through that. Like, how would you describe yourself? Would you say that's accurate? Are you disciplined?
Ooh, I so in that kind of radical self-judgment that can happen, I would say I'm barely disciplined at all, to the capacity I know I could be. Am I more disciplined than other people, or am I more disciplined than I would be? It's I think the mentorship and the element of what happened in that hero's journey, if the teachers that held my nose to the grindstone literally that was needed, as a young person that could go 1,000 different ways. It's so great to have teachers say, hold on a minute,
Mm.
um, but I would say that I like discipline. That's going back to those that stoic mentality that, like, and it can be a little brutal. We're thinking like you're gonna die, and life is only pain and that kind of stuff. Like, it's that's not really like the big takeaway if you're gonna go with those spiritual realms, but like there is freedom in it, and there's there's fruit in that structure that's undeniable. Like I said, like back to Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. And making yourself friendly with that idea that, like, you know, even this painting back here is still a step in a journey. This isn't my be all end all painting. It's not the thing I've been working to all this time. That thing is the work itself. And I'm not going anywhere. There's no final destination for us as artists. There's just the endless creative journey. And that's so wonderful if you can learn to accept the journey and not think that this next painting is some breakthrough thing. And similar with like just kind of how the philosophical piece affects life is like, the it won't be when I buy a house that I'm magically going to be happy. It just won't. And it makes it hard for me to do stuff sometimes because it's like, what do you do if it's just a journey? It's like, just got to be in the moment and be free and be happy. And that's for me to have if I want to grab it right now. And that's spiritual, and that's hard to be there all the time. So when it's not there, work on art and work on all kinds of stuff. I would say I'm disciplined in that like I said, I like health and fitness. I like going to the gym. I like having those kind of routines. I like, I mean, even in my passive, like, I love video games where it's like I will play those with a disciplined nature that I'll play that game until I've leveled up everything and whatever. That's not traditional discipline and that I'm getting anywhere with real life, but it's I will focus on things,
Mm.
and I seem to be kind of, and I think you might know, just like creatively, there's like that kind of, I think you have to wrestle that with your different businesses and being like, okay, if it's going to be YouTube, like I imagine that Andrew gets sucked into that with everything, and I'll
Oh
I'll
man.
get pulled in those rabbit holes.
I have to be so careful, Kenneth, man. I tell you what, I have to be so careful. Like I tried the video game thing for a little while. Like I think the last console that I bought was back in 2016, and I tried it because I kind of wanted to see what it was all about, and because I didn't grow up with video games, or I didn't even grow up with TV, and so I went in, and then I got hooked, and I have such an addictive personality that I was like, you know what? I'm gonna have to give this thing away and just go cold turkey. And I never touched a console again. I don't even think I've had a chance on anything. So I bought an Xbox, but the last console I had played before that was like not a Super Nintendo, a Nintendo 64, GoldenEye.
Oh
That
yeah.
was okay. All right. So yeah, I'm showing my age here.
No, I
But
love the 64. I still play mine sometimes. It's pretty hilarious.
But it's the I have to be careful. So I have to choose. Personally, I've got to choose what's the thing I'm going to get into. I tell you the big thing for me now that I'm kind of getting obsessed with, besides the whole working out and exercise thing, because I'm back on that kick. But the spearfishing has really taken my imagination, and I'm just thinking about the next spot that I'm going to go and do a dive. And this is coming from a guy that doesn't get in the water. Like I'm phobic still about the water and sharks and seals and things mainly the things that prey on the seals, because I'm still convinced, despite what the seasoned spearfishermen tell me, I still think you look an awful lot like a seal in murky water, and it's so there is that. So if you don't hear from me for a while, folks, just check with the hospital. Um, but it's that's something, because I got to have those things outside of art, right? I've got to have something to just hit that reset button. But I was terrible at it for years. I never had that outlet outside of art, and I thought, no, maybe I need to pick something up here. But it's interesting that it's video games for you. It's it's great to hear. It's like, maybe I'm assuming, but it's great to hear that you can control it, because I couldn't. I was just, I was in. I'm like, I gotta unhook, because I gotta get me that halo. I gotta get back into it. You know.
They're made to hook you, and
Oh man.
it's by design, and I do
Hmm.
not control it well. I mean, that's what I'm saying. The discipline piece is always challenged by those kind of things that, if I won a lottery tomorrow and could just choose to paint or not, I think I would come back around to painting, but who knows how long it would take me.
Mm.
The hunger drive is still, the thing that keeps me in the easel. But I think being being I like grinding. I like to feel like there's that quality of work and reward, and I struggle more with, like, the kind of the manifestation mindsets where, like, you just kind of magic things happen. Like, I'm like, no, man, it happens through hard work and determination and grit. And both are probably true to some capacity, and I just have to get over that. But I also, just tying these like personal things, like if you don't have other stuff, then I think art, I don't know. I think like art, and I saw that I always feel like an imposter kind of when I was in school. It's like I like painting and drawing, but I don't like it the most. I like all kinds of stuff,
Yeah.
and it's so fun to live life with that than being just like super obsessed with one thing. But at the
Mm.
same time, it's hard because I feel like I identify in so many ways, like almost like a split personality where I like, yeah, I'm a big nerd, but I also love hiking and backpacking and mountain biking and adventuring. And, like there's seasons where I live in Montana and in America is we have, I mean, literal seasons where it's just snowy and garbagey here for 5, 6 months, and having indoor hobbies is very convenient. But all summer I'm out paddleboarding and biking and hiking and backpacking as much as I can, and it inspires my art. So there's, yeah, there's a lot to me, I guess.
That's, I mean, there's gotta be, man. I mean, look, it would be such a crime to have you on the podcast where we didn't actually talk about painting. And I love hearing about what makes you tick and all the stuff going on behind the scenes, and even how you started as well, and some of these influences. And it's also, it's fascinating because we're occupying very similar spaces, and it's interesting to get your take on the way the world is now, and how that paradigm is shifting again. I think we're right in the middle of another one, and again, we're just going to see how this shakes out. But all that stuff to one side, I've had a blast talking to you about it. The painting itself. Now, you're doing your hiking, you're out in nature. What, and I know you're an amazing plein air artist as well, and so I imagine that's got to be a huge part of the artistic process. Walk me through this. How does this masterpiece that you're sitting in front of right now, the one that's just over, I guess, unless Zoom has mirrored this, it's over your left shoulder there. So tell me about this painting, and how would a piece like that, from the ground up, from the beginning, from walking up to the edge of this creek before it opens out to that lake. Where is that, by the way?
This is actually the Sawtooth Range down in southern Idaho. So this is
Wow.
far away from my normal stomping grounds, but I'm a mountain lover through and through. I don't care where the mountains are. I live next to Glacier Park, so I paint that a lot. But this is a kind of my headlining piece for my solo show in July, and it's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So I thought, hey, this might be a great time to paint this scene that, yeah, with standing there at the foot of that lake was, and most artists know there's that kind of like, I'm gonna paint this. Like that's, it's not a matter, matter of when it happens, but I knew I was gonna paint it. It was perfect. It was so hard not to just not, sit there and do sketches. Then obviously I took hundreds of photos. That's my going practice. And in that nuts and bolts kind of discussion, plein air has been kind of a challenge thing. I mean, it's like plein air painting has been a challenge in the, like, on the deeper element of like why we do it. And as an artist, I think, my draw to plein air is in the process and the experience of being there, understanding nature better, getting out into the inspiration and capturing it, being there for 2 hours at a time. Like there's so much fruit to be had plein air painting. But then a place I found myself caught in a couple of years ago is like, okay, cool. You can make a little 8x10. That's great. One, you can only sell that for so much money, but then also it doesn't do enough sometimes. Like this scene as an 8x10 doesn't freaking cut it, and I look at Beardstat and Moran, these guys that are like, no, we're going huge, and realizing that like that has to be a part of my artistic statement. There's I can't just be a plein air artist. As much as I love going out and plein air painting, it really only feels like the research and development phase of something. Like this is really where it happens. And
Mm.
when I'm doing this, I'm not thinking about plein air at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even reference plein air studies anymore. Like it used to be a thing. I used to kind of have to convince myself that plein air was for something. And
Mm.
I had to start just shifting away from that because it felt like a weird box that didn't fit. Like, I would make these plein air paintings and they weren't my art. They were my attempt at capturing things, and they were fun, and I love doing them, and people like buying them. There's people like the plein air style. Small unframed things are affordable. Again, think about that base building I mentioned earlier. It's like there's a cool place and space for plein air painting. But when it comes to these big epic paintings, like I have to switch gears and get out of that like copying nature mindset or big brush strokes mindset. Like I'm going for a different goal, and that's okay. But it took me a while to get to that comfort level as an artist. I used to just always feel like, you know, the alla prima method was everything. And now I don't work alla prima hardly ever. I freaking hate alla prima now. It feels like I'm rushing and struggling to fit everything in, and it seems unfinished and choppy. But that's just my own personal aesthetic and workflow. Like props to the painters that can do that. They blow my mind. It's just not how I can do things. It's too hard.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So this piece behind you, is that a 36 by 54? It looks like almost.
It's a 3 foot by 4 foot. So yeah,
Oh,
36 by 48.
48. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Brilliant.
And yeah, it's
Fantastic size.
considered
Yeah.
a big piece. I mean, I only make a couple of those a year most of the
Mhm.
time, and like I said, it's tough because I want those compositions to have a certain something. They have to have enough to carry the scene. And there's artists that make bigger paintings with just like a horizon. Like the guy I shared a studio with, Richie Carter, will do these amazing paintings that have almost nothing in them sometimes, but they're so beautiful. And that's his aesthetic. He sees that stuff and responds that way. But for me, these big pieces, if it's just the tie into the old masterworks, but I want there to be enough to enjoy, for someone to see a painting from a distance, but then get close and have things to enjoy about the scene. And some of that then, becomes what you render and how much story you're telling as you get close to things. But, that's the nuts and bolts of it are definitely like I do photography gathering is like the kind of pillar of it where I'm out getting the material. I really can't just work from other people's photos. I found that to be really, kind of stale or something for me. Like, even though there's really amazing photos out there, it wasn't my experience. So there's something I can't draw from when I see just a cool photo. And, there's like stupid things like in this picture, I have all kinds of detailed shots taken of these rocks and stuff that they don't mean anything as a photographer. Like the photo is not remarkable, but what it helps me out as an artist is so helpful. So anyway, getting that material and sourcing it and then taking notes of it in my head is one of the big things where I just got to have the experience. And that's a hard thing to rationalize to like my girlfriend or my family who all see me out having fun all summer. And it's like, I'm working, guys. Like, it's hard to say like this, I'm having a fantastic time, but if I don't do this and I don't make the paintings, then I don't make any money, which is so awesome, for me.
Yeah. So I got to be out on my paddleboard in the middle of the lake. It's work, guys.
We had done
I'm
40 miles of backpacking, and this was our last day at this lake.
Oh,
And,
wow. Yeah.
it was like, it's weird, but like that's the kind of experiential piece that I draw from. And maybe
Mm.
to touch on the tie in the spiritual stuff and the philosophical stuff that goes on with this, like I think being in nature and the physical journey, right, of hiking and climbing hills and mountains. But then again, I'm away from my screen and the society, and you're back into this like raw human form in a raw animal world that you got to be turned up. And the sawtooths actually don't have grizzly bears, but where I normally am have huge, scary freaking bears. So you're just on this heightened awareness that I think makes everything more beautiful. It just changes everything. And if I don't have that coming into this artistic process, like I don't know if I could fake it. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't
Yeah.
tried it, I guess. Maybe someday when I'm old, and that's the thing I think about now as I get out here and get these materials and get the inspiration because someday it will be a lot harder for me. So for me to do a 50-mile backpacking trip now, it's like, heck yeah, now's the time. And yeah, so that is the foundation. When I think about these paintings, it's like those experiences, those moments where nature just does what it does. It's just there.
Awesome.
Just yeah,
Yeah.
it's just awesome. But then yeah, it's all the other nuts and bolts of drawing and sketching and
So how long would you spend in drawing for a piece like that, a typical 36 by 48? Because I just personally speaking, when I'm doing anything at that kind of scale, I feel like there's so much writing on this process. I'm going to be here for weeks, if not months. I got to get this composition right. So I might even spend a couple of weeks on the composition alone in the sketchbook, maybe something digital, but definitely a color study. So what would that process look like here for this piece?
yeah. Oh, and on that note, a thing I kind of hang my hat on, and I think I believe in, and it's a kind of stupid saying, but it's so true. But it's well begun is half done. So for me,
Oh, I love
you
that.
know, especially coming out of school, and the academies did not teach this. That'll be something I would fault and caution people as they're pursuing whatever education is like. Academies are all about like working from life and understanding light and form and very useful tools and stuff I'm grateful for in a craft sense. But boy, they didn't teach anything about picture making. They don't teach. They did a horrible job about teaching composition. It could be because I quit early because I was a bad boy. But ultimately, there was so little in that, like, how do you compose? Like, you could set a model up and they could all paint models on a stand perfectly well, but it's like, all right, now what? You know, do me a Bouguereau. I want to have a lady flowing out of a tree. Can you do that? It's like, no, you can't rig a model up to do that. And that was a thing that I think they struggle from in a modern sense of like, okay, cool, develop these things, and it does take time. And I'm glad they do that. But this other stuff, like you said, is it's like so much sketching and designing and like kind of like feels like improv poetry or something. You're just like throwing out ideas, trying to get something to stick. And my sketchbook habit, which was a long time thing since high school, of just sketching and thumbnailing and gesture drawing, oddly enough, is something I did just thousands of hours of. And you wouldn't think that would apply to the landscape, but there's so much happening here. And when you think about the forms of mountains or trees, that like gesture and that flow is so useful. And I mean, the school in New York, they really they felt gesture was kind of a waste of time, and I think that's a huge detriment to their folks because gesture is like I think it's still everything for me, and
Mm, mm.
yeah. But sketching wise, I would say I've switched to everything being digital. I have an iPad now, mind blowing. Just the Procreate and the usefulness of its tools has just completely changed my process.
Wow.
And I mean, ultimately, it's the process is still me sketching. I tend to look at the
Of course.
photo and draw and not, I mean, occasionally I'll drop the photo on and just skew things. That's if the photo is like really amazing and I feel like it's got enough to make a painting as it is. But I tend to kind of cherry pick things, and it allows me to go from that like sketch phase where I'm just thinking, okay, small composition or, zoomed way out. And I'm thinking about those big shapes, big values, big angles, and just throwing down those sketches and ideas and placing things kind of as I see fit. And then zooming in and saying, oh, actually, okay, that rock, I'll grab that rock from over there. Oh, that rock, I'll change the shape. Or that tree, I'll get rid of it. You start to have some fun with the process. And that took a long time to get to because I used to just kind of wait till I had a really great photo and had the self confidence to say, okay, now I can go ahead and paint that. But this way is so much better. And I think I make way better art now than I used to.
Excellent. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I for one love the digital process. I'm a big fan of Photoshop, so I'm drawing on the Wacom tablet all the dang time to design some of the bigger work. Um, but Procreate's fantastic as well. I haven't gotten into it as much, but I've got the iPad and the Apple Pencil sitting right there, and I could just get straight back into it. But recently, the thing that kind of twigged for me was that when you're doing a physical drawing in the sketchbook, well, you have the drawing. At least you've got the physical thing, and I still am having trouble walking away from the physical thing. I got an email from somebody recently. Shout out to Richard. Richard's a big fan and has been following for a little while. He's like, I want to buy a drawing from you every 6 months. I just want something to just track your progress. And so I was really touched by that. But if I was just doing the digital, I'd kind of go, well, I'll print this out for you. I'm having trouble walking away with the sketchbook. I think having a good balance of both is great. But I hear you, man. Like on the iPad front, that is such a handy thing to have. And it is faster, but there's a lot more dimension that you can add to something and make bold decisions. I think that's the biggest thing for me is the bold decisions quick. And if you don't like it, then just X out of that and just revert back to the saved version or a few steps. But when you're doing something in real time analog, that's a lot more difficult. That there's time then. And I find even still, as free as I like to think I am, I'm still like, oh, I don't know, holding on to it pretty tight.
Oh man, yeah, that's that. I just made a painting earlier this month that I had, these trees coming out on a really clear landscape, and that's always one of those, like you said, there's a lot of consequence, and I tend to do, except I'm not an alla prima painter, so I kind of paint the background in and just left these indicators of where the trunks were and where that tree will be. But when it came down to, all right, it's go time, I got to paint those limbs and commit to that drawing, and there's only so much turpentine would have done to get rid of some of that stuff. And you better believe I took a picture with my iPad and sketched out some ideas of where I wanted those lines to be and how I wanted that flow to happen, because I just, as experienced as I am, I didn't have the kind of gumption to say, boom, here's the branch, not until I got to experiment and play with it some. And the iPad is just like, you're so right. Like I won't be able to sell things from this. And I kind of like that sometimes where I can just, this truly just feels like the mechanics yard where you're just banging on stuff and figuring things out. And there's the end goal is that I make a functioning working thing, but the process is just messy and dirty. But I do still believe and I love drawing. So like that, like the kind of sacred object concept, that like this drawing I'm going to make is a drawing for its sake. And I like that. But kind of like the plein air thing. Like the plein air is its own sacred thing. The drawing is its own thing. And they do inform each other, but creatively, if my goal is to make a big painting, I'm at a place with my deadlines and stuff that it's like, it's freaking go time. I got to get this stuff done. And the fastest possible way to get through that R&D is needed for me right now. I wouldn't encourage it for people learning, it's like, it feels like a professional tool that I rely on, but like, you got to draw with your hands and learn the medium and just the tactile element of like drawing with charcoal or graphite is like, I've spent thousands of hours doing it. And, I don't regret that. I love it.
Mhm.
Right now, when I'm trying to make paintings that got to sell, I got to do that as fast and as good as I can. And it feels like these digital tools are just tools. They're not really art, which is a bold thing for me to say, because I know some people really love the digital art and it can become that for you, but like, again, for me, mine's back there. It's in the
Fair
handmade
enough,
thing.
man. Yeah.
And the digital piece, people won't be going through my hard drive someday trying to make NFTs out of it. I mean, maybe they will,
Maybe they will,
but
bro. If NFTs are a thing, I mean that. I was talking to my buddy Samuel Earp about this, and I want to get him back on the podcast. But we had a bit of a challenge in the last series of the Creative Endeavor, where we're like, okay, race to go and get your first NFT out there, and he beat me to it, like hands down. He just got out there and did it, and I was still working out what an NFT was. But it seems to be a bit of a flash now. They don't seem to be quite the thing that they were touted to be in the beginning. And there's only a select few playing that game really, really well. And I just didn't feel like I was at that level where I like knew what I was doing enough to be able to go. Although I'm stoked about crypto and decentralization. I think that's an interesting opportunity as well, and could be something interesting for artists. But whether I talk about that more on the podcast, I'm not too sure. But it's something that I'm looking at. But yeah, look, on the digital side of things, I mean, again, whatever this is the thing, whatever helps get you there in that process, because, and I've got to mention this because somebody commented on this on a video, because I was starting a bit of a series called Sketch Zone, which was digital art on my YouTube channel. And I had this guy, somebody commented and said, look, you keep saying this is a means to an end, but it is a art form in its own right. Please show a little more respect. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, it kind of got me a little bit. I'm like, and I didn't mean to be disrespectful at all, but I'm thinking, hang on, guy, this, I don't think you, for all of us, it's a different thing. It's just, who's anyone to judge? This is your process, and it's a way that you see that. And I just find that just so fascinating. And for me, yeah, it's a means to an end. I do look at digital art and digital artists, as art and artists. But for me, I don't think I'm going to print out my digital designs and hang them on the wall. Um, Maybe they're better suited for a T-shirt, but they informed the painting, and that was the necessary step that I had to go through. It's important to look for the edge, though, isn't it? Whatever's going to help you get there, use that.
Yeah, and that's what the Russian teacher I had early on, he kind of said, like, his job is to give you the skills, but he's like, at the end of the day, when you go out to make art, your only responsibility is to make the best art you can.
Hmm.
And that's kind of liberating when especially in the academic dogma centralized thing, or like you said, in the regular education system where it's got to be all about the idea. It's like, at the end of the day, you just got to really be doing something for you authentically, and then finding people that like it, if you're going to make any money doing it anyway. But that whole process is like, it is kind of hardcore radical self, and digital is such a good playground because you don't have that the kind of commitment phobia where it's just like, okay, here we go, I'm going to make that line and I can't get it off again. Like, oil paint's really forgiving, but it's so nice to have that digital tool. So I'm a huge proponent of it. Again, I'm a nerd, so I like that kind of stuff anyway. But yeah, these all happen digitally now first, and then I grid them. I'm doing some new stuff with acrylic paints first. So this is all like
Interesting. Okay. Was
woo
this
woo
one
magics.
underpainted with acrylic
Yes.
first? Wow. Okay.
Yes. I mean, this is actually only halfway glazed. And I'll tell you right now that I only started glazing it today.
Oh,
And I
wow.
only glazed it for probably 4 hours. So all of that color work that you're seeing in the background took
Mhm.
less than 4 hours to do.
Hang
So
on.
that's
Color work. You mean color at all? Was it like a grisaille, like black and white
Yep.
first?
Yep. What you're
Wow.
seeing down here, that's still grisaille. There's no color there yet. So this piece is not even close to being done, really. I've got many, many, many hours of work to do, but that is acrylic paint. It's an acrylic grisaille. And yeah, this is kind of my new crazy radical witchcraft thing.
Look
Because
out.
yeah, it's new, and it's something that I've been experimenting with, and it's super fun. I think it's great to be trying out new things. And a part of that process for me has been, trying to recognize shortcomings. So I really struggle with texture and trying to make paintings that have more oomph to them, and I would try with these quick dry oil paints, and oil grisailles have always bugged the hell out of me because you have to sit there and wait for a week or two for this thing to tack up. And then any paint you add to that has to be, fattened up. So you're working that fat over lean element. And I hated it. Like, so the grisaille I knew wasn't working for me. And that process was unenjoyable. So this new thing I'm doing, I'm actually liking much, much more because it's allowing me to build texture and body with the acrylic paint, adding these like texture pastes and super fun, fast drying, responsive things that are giving this painting so much more fun, while I'm only worrying about the drawing and value, which is also makes the process much more fun because I'm not getting super heady with my color and depth and atmosphere. It's like just value. It's just drawing to me at that point. So I'm able to like juggle one ball. And then after it dries, which again takes a day, you give acrylic some cure time, but it's really pretty fast. I can go straight in with washy oil paint and build my normal oil paint layers up as I would. So it's felt super fun, super responsive. And yeah, it's new and spooky. I'm not sure I'm going to stick with it all the time. Like this painting back here was done just, oil paint directly, but it's yeah, kind of my new crazy thing I'm experimenting with.
That is so exciting. That's really exciting because I mean, from what you're saying, from just looking at the piece right now, it looks so resolved. Mind you, it's just a little bit through a screen on Zoom, and Zoom video quality is not that great yet. But still, I'm looking at that and I'm just shocked. I just did a grisaille for a painting I was doing in Monument Valley in oils on a copper panel, and I can so relate to what you were saying because I was waiting for weeks and weeks for this thing to dry. And I got in touch with Ray Aslan, who makes these panels, and I said, "Look, what am I doing wrong, bro? Because it's not dry. What's going on?" He said, "I'll run through the colors that you used." And I was like, "Okay, lead white, a permanent crimson, and then I also used cobalt blue." And he's like, "There's your problem. That cobalt's going to take a while." I'm like, of course I knew that, but I didn't do it. But
It's
still,
all about the raw umber, man. Raw umber is the grisaille secret weapon.
yeah, and a lot of my new ones will be with those earth tones. And it's funny. I don't use a lot of raw umber. I'm a big fan of the burnt umber, but I'll try the raw umber. I'll try that. But
I think probably any of the umbers, I know that the dry time is actually, you have to be careful glazing with raw umber because it's such a finicky color. They have to over oil the crap out of it sometimes just to get it to not dry, because yeah, it's always just trying to get chalked up.
yeah,
So, but it does go fast. And with acrylic paint, I mean, this is another acrylic grisaille I can show you back here.
we're getting the tour here, folks. This is
That
phenomenal.
one is
Beautiful.
the
Wow.
next piece.
Yeah.
So there is warms in there, like there's yellow ochre mixed in with my acrylic.
Right.
Just acrylic yellow ochre. So this is still just all acrylic underpainting, but now I'm freed up to do color as I want to. And
Mm.
it just feels like it's an extra step, but it seems like it's a step that actually makes that process faster. Like I said, well begun is half done. This feels like some of that preemptive attack stuff that if I can get my everything in the right place, it's go time. And then you don't have to worry about it so much. Like right now I'm just painting color and it feels like I'm just having a ball. I'm not thinking. The drawing's all in. The values are good enough. I'm freaking just able to have fun rendering rocks and forms and getting my light to bounce and creating those atmospheric colors. I don't have to juggle everything at once, which is such a it just makes the process more joyful for me at this point.
That's fantastic. I'm experiencing a little bit of a mental shift here for myself, thinking, okay, maybe there's another way around this. This is really you're inspiring me right now. This is really cool. I don't know that I could stoop to that low of having to get out the acrylics, but
I know. I had to buy some for this community art event I did. They were like, okay, this, you have to do acrylic for this thing because there was this painting was going to go hang in the in a business locally. So it was like this, just community art thing. Like one of those yes man things where it's like I didn't make any money at it, but I was a part of my art community and I love that. But anyway, the push, I got this acrylic and was like, man, I hate this. I hate acrylic paint. And it's so frustrating and like you're fighting it all the time. And it wasn't until I kind of had this chain of ahas where it's like, well, I hate how long black and white takes when I'm doing oil, but I like how fast these acrylics would dry if I didn't have to deal with color. I was like, well, you don't even have to glaze. Like I was getting these weird glaze mediums for the acrylic paint, doing everything I could to try to push acrylic into the oil family, and that failed. It was still frustrating. It dries in 20 minutes. So like all of a sudden it was like, oh no, I can do the black and white in acrylic where everything's working how I want it to, and I can do the color in oil and have a full day to mess around and shift these tones, and then as soon as they dry, I can go through with impasto because I'm still building a healthy paint layering instead of mixing up those fat over lean things. So I'm hoping, this is still new. Like this is probably only the fourth or fifth one I've done. So hopefully it's something that I've refined as a process, and hopefully you guys can out there see, oh, he's, getting better at painting, hopefully.
that's always the goal, isn't it? Although it's hard to imagine, I must admit. And I'm not saying that to blow smoke, man, but I'm just so excited to see where you go with your body of work. Um, so how long then? And I get this question all the time, and it's so hard to answer because it depends on what you're painting. But how long would a 36 by 48 take you, given the recent change in your process?
Well, yeah, that's it's an important question, and it is. But the answers I've always loved, say the right answer to that question is for me to make this painting in the time it did. It's taken me every painting I did up to that point, so it's taken me 5 years,
For
or
sure.
whatever people come up with that number, and that is the right answer for when art collectors try to bug me about it. But then as a professional, so obviously my goal is to make it as fast as I can, and as good as I can. It's always those are things that they fight each other sometimes, but this experimentation is definitely driven by that. Okay, there's problems with working alla prima. There's things I could do within a day or two while that paint's wet, and then I have to start getting into the layering or glazing and modifying things that way. So, uh, you know, something I've thought about just as a side note to this, but it is helpful. It's helped me out a lot. But like when we see dancers perform or an actor, it's like you don't see all the rehearsal lines. You don't see all of the tripping and falling down they do over each other that happens being up to that performance. So when it comes to like this piece or a show, I've done my rehearsing. Whether it's in the iPad sketching out my stuff or in the valuing and the transfer process. Like I want this thing to feel like a performance without a hook, and to make it fast and to make that flawless is actually the goal. It's not to sit there and toil over it. And I think there's this kind of like romantic image of like an artist just beating their head out in their painting, and it's like that's stupid. You don't want to do that. Like if you're doing that and you have a deadline or you have a gallery wanting good work from you, then you are sabotaging yourself. Like do that, do it creatively and in your process when it's a safer space to do it, but don't do it while there's a deadline hanging. Don't do it while you're got, this is hopefully going to be in some magazines and stuff. Like I don't have time to get lost and confused with what I'm doing. So, all that said, I probably spent about 12 hours painting the black and white underpainting on it. Yeah, I'd probably say another 4 or 5 hours tweaking the design and messing around. So, probably getting close to that like 20 hours. But then today it's like 4 hours and the color's halfway done. Hopefully, I'll work probably till 9 o'clock tonight and then some tomorrow. And I'm hoping the color will be kind of getting good and be done. So 40 hours is my goal, maybe.
Incredible.
But I might run into some problems with it. Some of that stuff, as things dry, you might be like, oh crap, I got to work on that area more. And I tend to kind of do this funneling system as I'm finishing work. And, the process, the critiquing process, like the self critiquing process is where you kind of step back and you look at it. And it's like, we do these things with figure drawing where you're like washing your eye over it. So you don't try to look carefully, but you just let the eye wash. And then like, if something grabs it, if you're like, ooh, that green is too saturated, or oh, that edge is too hard, or yeah, that cloud is bad. Like then you just do that and do that and do that and do that. And eventually the time span gets longer, right? So I'm there painting for 5 hours, but I've probably only made 15 changes instead of the original block in time where I'm just hacking at it and you see all this progress. The last part where you're just really changing super, super subtle things, just pushing a form back, tweaking a tree, changing a drawing bit, you're just that finishing phase is so tedious sometimes. But again, I'm hoping through proper lead up work, I avoid some of that really tedious stuff at the end.
Fantastic, man. Well, that's inspiring to me. I mean, definitely, I can, I could safely say, well, just watch this space because you've inspired me to maybe play with a few more things, maybe stick with the grisaille a little bit longer because I'm just blown away that level of detail and rendering and just finesse over some of those fine points within that landscape and the amount of time. Like anyone looking at that could just go easily 4 times the amount of time that you're saying, but incredible, inspiring stuff. Hey, Kenneth, this has been such an inspiring conversation. I always like to wrap up these podcasts because it's something that I find I get obsessed with, and maybe it's a bit of a waste of time, but at the same time, maybe it's necessary to kind of reflect on one's life and trajectory in their art career. But the more I'm learning now, the more I'm kind of thinking, man, if I knew this 10 years ago, what would I be doing different? What would my life look like today? So let me ask you, if you could go back to your younger, self 10 years from this point now back, what would you tell yourself? What are some of the things that you would do different? I mean, are you happy or satisfied or, content, at least in the place that you're in now? Or would you like to be further ahead? Maybe a bit of a painful question there, but what would you have done differently 10 years ago to anticipate this moment now?
The biggest, I mean, I really like, the advice I've had from galleries and even just in the mentoring element of watching other artists, I have a lot of uh, grace for myself, I guess. Like I'm still so young, even though I'm in my 30s now. It's like in the fine art world, that's nothing. You're still so young. Like to think of myself in my 20s trying to take myself seriously. It's like, man, just be where you are and like stay learning and stay curious. And the biggest thing that like, part of this process, not believing some of the narratives that I did let run the show early on, whether it was that kind of academia, like you have to work from life thing, or because I really love Richard Schmidt and some of the really cool, brushy, impressionistic stuff that like I do love, but it was not true to me. And if could have liberated myself earlier from that, like one of the things that I hear with students and other people, where it's like, oh, you can overwork it. It's like, that's totally up to you. Like there's not some perfect painting that like you can miss or hit. Like it's like you have to throw this like target. Like you make that thing, you craft every bit of it, and you can go back and craft it. I mean, if that's your aesthetic, you really want like a one and done thing, then like, yeah, that's a little different. But for me, I've found so much more joy in this process by just like doing what I like and painting it to whatever I enjoy, whether it's too detailed for some people or not colorful enough for some people. It's like, I don't care. I don't have to care. Like I found people that want to buy it. So that's cool. Like being more accepting of like my own vision, because I think that would allow me to be more applying to that instead of getting confused by things and confused by those mixed inputs. And especially if they aren't your mentors, people you really love and admire their work, then definitely listen to them. But I was letting anybody critique my stuff and it would all hurt or, steer you in some way. So now, yeah, I would go back and kind of be like, it's okay, kid, like
You got
it's
this.
okay to, yeah, yeah. And I got to kind of tell it to myself now, even that like 5 year ahead, I got to be like, all right, Ken, you're just here in the dugout right now and you got to keep painting. And that's I think it's hard for artists to be faithful in that because it is a scary world and it's hard to financially put your skin on your neck on the line. But the more authentic you are, the more likely you're going to be successful. If you're trying to copy somebody else or that's one of the things I did. Also took advice from a gallery guy who's, don't emulate living painters. And that's the thing I have with Instagram, even, is like trying to follow all these artists and seeing great art that these modern guys are making can be a little distracting. So I find myself now, looking through my library at the old dead guys and trying to keep that aim really high and just be like this, what's going to be in a museum someday? What's that level that you're talking about? The humans, whether they speak the same language or not, can see and feel something. Like that's some cool art. That's some powerful stuff. And you don't get there by worrying about deadlines. You don't get there by trying to be better than the guys in the magazines. Like you got to just like live to that high point. And yeah, that's not just like one thing you do, right? It's a whole combination of ways to live.
That's what a perfect way to end this podcast. I gotta say, it's been a massive pleasure. Just such an honor to talk to you and share this studio time with you. And thank you so
Yeah,
much
likewise.
for showing us your paintings. Um, Kenneth Yarus, man, thank you for being on the Creative Endeavor.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavor podcast. It's so good to be back with you once again with a video podcast. If you enjoyed this, then make sure you hit that like button for me and leave me a comment down below. What was a takeaway for you from this episode? What are some of the things that got you thinking? I'd love to hear from you. Now, of course, if you're not already following Kenneth on his website, make sure you go to KennethYarus.com, and also he can be found on Instagram at Kenneth Yarus. Huge shout out and thank you to Kenneth for joining me. I can't wait to come to you next week. I'm talking with Joe Paquette, but until then, stay inspired and I'll see you in another episode of The Creative Endeavor.